Let's talk about some good news this week on MCrider. The National Highway Transportation Safety Administration has released its annual report, and motorcycle fatalities in the United States are down in 2018 compared to last year. This week on MCrider, let's talk about it and how it affects you and how you can use these numbers to make better riding decisions next year. Hey, my name's Kevin, and I release a weekly video here on MCrider focused on road skills and road strategy to help make you a better rider. This week we're going to look at some numbers released by the NHTSA. We'll see what we can learn from them, but let me start by saying I do not pretend to be a statistician in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I took a statistics class way back in 1986 in college, and that's about as close as I can claim to being a statistical expert. So I'd love to hear from you guys as well. Leave a comment below with your thoughts on this subject, or join us on the forums where we'll be discussing this video there as well. So there's a lot in this report, and I'll have a link to the report in the description, but I want to hit some of the highlights in this video. So here are some raw numbers from the report. In 2018, there were 244 fewer motorcycle fatalities compared to 2017. In 2018, there were 145 fewer riders killed who are legally impaired while riding. Now, just raw numbers don't mean much if we don't know how many motorcycles are on the road, and this is a little bit tougher to find accurate numbers for 2018, but historically, the number of registered motorcycles rise by about 100,000 a year, and vehicle miles traveled increase usually by about the same amount. Maybe a little less, as some riders like myself have a couple of motorcycles in the garage. So overall, I think these are good numbers. There are a lot of factors that play into this, and one that I think has a huge impact is the number of bikes that are currently available with ABS. ABS saves lives. Motorcycles are required in the UK to have ABS, and this has had a trickle-down effect on the bikes sold in the US as well, as more and more bikes have this as a standard feature. Some numbers show that bikes with ABS are involved in 30 to 35% fewer crashes, and that's a pretty significant number. I think the availability and quality of motorcycle gear is much better today than it was a few years ago. And when I was a kid, about the only thing that you could find is an open face helmet, hopefully a shield for it. And a lot of riders who are involved in crashes today come out of it with no significant injuries, and I think a lot of that has to do with the gear that we've got available. So the report is good news for the industry, and if we read a little into it, we can see how we can improve those numbers and how some specific steps we can take to keep ourselves from being counted in the report when it comes out next year. The biggest thing that you can do is to wear a helmet. The NHTSA estimates that from every 100 motorcycle fatalities, about 37 of those riders would have survived had they been wearing a helmet. So a helmet is really your first line of defense, and it makes a huge difference in being able to come out unscathed from a crash. Second, getting motorcycle training. In 2017, 23% of fatal crashes did not involve another vehicle. So what that tells me is it wasn't that notorious car turning left in front of the rider, wasn't somebody rear-ending the rider, it was the rider losing control of their motorcycle. So almost 1/4 of motorcycle crashes are directly a result of the way the rider's riding or their lack of control of their motorcycle. So that's a huge deal. And third is riding sober. Now this message of riding sober, I think, is starting to make a difference. In 2017, there were 1,440 legally impaired riders killed in the U.S. In 2018, that number dropped to 1,295. That's a 10.1% drop in the number of fatalities. And while that statistic is getting better, it still says something about the riding community when 25% of the riders are legally impaired when they die on a motorcycle. And that doesn't even take into account the number of riders who are legal They had alcohol in their system, but they were riding legally, which still impacts your ability to ride a bike. So the simple answer is don't drink and ride. Now, I have videos dedicated solely to this subject of riding impaired, and I hear comments from some riders who say, man, this message doesn't work. You're wasting your time, or you're preaching to the choir. But I have news for you. It does work, because I don't just hear from you. I also hear from guys who stopped riding impaired because of the message of MCrider. I hear from the returning rider who sought out training and practices on the parking lot with the field guide, who credits their newfound skill to riding safer and with better road strategy because of the things they're learning here on MCrider and because they're taking additional training classes. So we've talked a lot about numbers here, but I want to narrow our focus down and look at a particular segment of the riding population, and that's returning riders. Riding a motorcycle used to be a young guy's game, but more and more riders are returning riders. And I want to include in this number people who bought their first motorcycle or returned to riding after the age of 40. So let's look at the median age of riders right now. In 2012, the median age was 45. In 2014, that increased to 47. And in 2018, it increased to 50. So that means guys are holding on to their motorcycles, they're riding later in life, and a lot of riders are getting involved in riding later in life. Because the median age of riders is increasing, the age of motorcycle fatalities is also on the rise. But why do I think returning riders are more at risk than some of the other public? It's because motorcycles are infinitely more powerful and lighter now than they were when you rode years ago. The skills you had when you used to ride are mostly gone. Skills erode over time, and if it's been a few years since you rode, you probably want to approach it as a brand new rider. This not only includes what motorcycle you choose to start back with, but how you approach your training as well. I mean, when I was a kid, they told me to stay away from the front brake. You don't want to lock that brake up, so do most of your braking with the rear brake. Nowadays, we know that that's bad information, that you need to be using the majority of the front brake, and that's where the most of your stopping distance comes from, is using that front brake appropriately. I used to see it time and time again in new rider classes. I would almost always have one or two experienced riders who had their license and were just getting back into riding, or they've been riding for years and they, just needed to get legal. And they'd be seated right next to someone who had never ridden a motorcycle in their life. Well, by the end of the weekend, the new rider would be riding as well, if not better, than the so-called experienced rider. The experienced rider had bad habits to overcome. They've not listened to tips being offered, and their mental approach coming into the entire weekend was wrong from the start. See, riding a motorcycle effectively is a lifelong pursuit. It's a part of the joy of riding, getting to learn a new skill, continuing to develop the skills you have, and constantly challenging yourself to get better. So my challenge for you next year is to never stop learning. Never stop growing as a rider, and it'll pay you back with years of safer riding. Till next week, guys, it's Kevin with MCrider, and I'll see you on the road. There are multiple ways to support the channel. You can become a member on YouTube at mcrider.com/member, or support the channel through Patreon at mcrider.com/support. Either way, you'll get full access to the forum and the field guides, which will further the training that we release here on a weekly basis.